In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, Daniel Hart seemed to have it all. He was the kind of man people noticed without realizing why, tall, with an easy smile and a way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. He dressed sharply, not in a showy way, but in a style that suggested he cared about the details. Neighbors saw him helping elderly residents carry groceries, holding doors open for strangers, and laughing easily at community events. It was no surprise that Emma Collins fell for him quickly. She was a local art teacher, soft-spoken and gentle, with a deep love for her work and an even deeper belief in the goodness of people. To her, Daniel wasn't just a boyfriend, he was a perfect partner who seemed to understand her in ways no one else had. What Emma didn't know was that Daniel's attention wasn't hers alone. A few months before meeting Emma, he had met Lily Collins, Emma's younger sister, by pure chance. Lily worked part-time at a small coffee shop in town, while writing short stories in her spare time. She had a sharp wit and a restless spirit, always looking for the next big experience. Daniel saw something in her too, and the spark was mutual. To Lily, he was someone who encouraged her dreams, listened to her ramble about her writing, and made her feel like she could do anything. She believed their connection was rare, maybe even once in a lifetime. The truth was far less romantic. Daniel had a skill for compartmentalizing his life, slipping into different roles as easily as changing clothes. With Emma, he was steady, thoughtful, and dependable, the kind of man who planned surprise picnics in the park and left sweet notes in her desk drawer. With Lily, he was adventurous, spontaneous, and full of grand promises about traveling the world together. He thrived on the thrill of keeping both worlds separate, convinced he could maintain the balance forever. He worked in sales, a job that gave him the perfect excuse for irregular hours and sudden absences. If he told Emma he had to attend a conference, he could be with Lily for a weekend getaway without raising suspicion. If Lily thought he had a late client meeting, he might be having dinner at Emma's place. Daniel's lies were carefully constructed, each one blending into the next so naturally that neither sister noticed the cracks forming. He even went so far as to memorize small details, what stories he had told to which sister, which gifts belonged to which holiday, and which excuses had already been used. The sisters, meanwhile, had always been close, but had begun to drift slightly in recent years. They were in different stages of life, and their busy schedules often kept them apart. This distance worked in Daniel's favor. He knew they didn't share every detail of their personal lives anymore, and he used that gap to his advantage. When they did talk about their relationships, the information was vague enough to keep him safe. Emma might mention a date night without specifying where they went, while Lily might casually reference a romantic gesture without saying the man's name. Daniel felt untouchable. He believed that as long as he kept his stories straight, no one would catch him. He told himself he was simply keeping everyone happy, that no one was really getting hurt. He ignored the fact that his actions were built entirely on deception. Each time he managed to pull off another lie without getting caught, his confidence grew. In the eyes of the community, Daniel and Emma were the perfect couple. People saw them together at art gallery openings and weekend markets, unaware that the following evening he might be with Lily, laughing over coffee in a quiet cafe. It was a delicate dance, and Daniel was the choreographer, moving between two lives with precision. But in the stillness of night, when the excitement faded, there was always a risk, tiny but present, that the two worlds would collide. Daniel had no plan for what would happen if they did. He told himself it wouldn't come to that he was too careful, too smart, too good at this game. What he didn't realize was that no matter how perfect his timing, no matter how flawless his lies seemed, the truth had a way of finding cracks to slip through. And in Willow Creek, those cracks were already forming. Unseen by Daniel but growing wider with every step he took. The stage was set, and all it would take was one small mistake for his entire carefully built world to come crashing down. For nearly a year, Daniel's double life went undisturbed. He had perfected the art of juggling two relationships, and his careful attention to detail made him believe he was untouchable. When he was with Emma, his demeanor was calm and reliable. He would ask about her students, attend her school's art exhibitions, and remember the names of her favorite painters. With Lily, he was playful and impulsive, sending her last-minute texts to meet him for late-night drives or surprise dinners. He adapted himself to fit what each woman wanted, never giving them a reason to suspect there was someone else. But perfection doesn't last forever. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a small slip, one that Daniel didn't even notice. One afternoon, Emma was tidying up her apartment when she found a receipt tucked into the pocket of Daniel's jacket. It was for a delicate silver necklace with a small heart pendant. The problem was, she had never received it. She told herself it must have been for his mother, or maybe a friend, but a faint unease lingered in her mind. She didn't ask him about it, not wanting to seem suspicious. Meanwhile, Lily experienced her own moment of doubt. She was scrolling through social media when a familiar face caught her eye. Daniel smiling with his arm around Emma in a photograph posted by someone else. The caption mentioned an art gallery opening, an event Lily hadn't attended. Within minutes the post disappeared, likely deleted, but the image stayed burned in her mind. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself Daniel must have been with a colleague or an old friend. Still, the thought stuck with her, shadowing her excitement whenever she saw him. The sisters didn't talk often enough to immediately connect their suspicions. Their conversations were surface level, often centered on family updates or small talk. But life has a way of forcing the truth closer to the surface. During a family dinner a few weeks later, the first real crack appeared. Emma casually mentioned that Daniel had been away on a work trip to Chicago. Lily, without thinking, said it was strange because Daniel had taken her to the coast that same weekend. There was an awkward pause before they both laughed it off, each assuming they had misunderstood. Still, something sharp and unsettling lodged itself in their minds. From that point, the sisters began noticing things they had once overlooked. Emma realized Daniel often avoided making plans more than a few days in advance. Lily noticed he was strangely protective of his phone, keeping it face down on the table or in his pocket. Both started to pick up on inconsistencies in his stories, details that didn't quite align, timelines that seemed off by just enough to raise questions. They didn't confront him right away. Instead, suspicion turned into quiet observation. Emma started checking the small details. How his clothes smelled when he came over. Whether his car had more miles on it than his explanations could justify. Lily began paying attention to his mood swings, noticing how sometimes he seemed distracted, as if carrying the weight of another conversation in his mind. Daniel, for his part, remained confident. If he noticed the shift in their behavior, he didn't take it seriously. He believed his charm was enough to keep them from doubting him for long. He continued weaving his lies, adjusting them slightly to cover any gaps, unaware that the sisters were slowly piecing together the puzzle. Then came a moment neither could ignore. Emma was leaving a cafe one rainy afternoon when she saw Daniel's car parked across the street. Inside, through the window, she spotted him sitting with Lily. Their heads were close together, and his hand rested lightly on hers. Emma froze, watching just long enough to confirm what her mind had tried to deny. She didn't rush in or call out, she simply turned and walked away, her heart pounding but her face calm. That night, she didn't tell Lily what she had seen. She needed to be sure. And more than that, she needed to know how deep the deception went. Both sisters, now fully suspicious, but still silent, began moving in quiet parallel, gathering their own private doubts. Without realizing it, they were heading toward the same conclusion, and once they reached it, there would be no turning back. Daniel had always thought the danger lay in being caught by one woman. What he hadn't considered was what might happen if both discovered the truth at the same time. The truth finally broke through on a cold November night, and it happened faster than either sister expected. Lily had been riding in Daniel's car earlier that day when she noticed something unusual. While he stepped out to pay for gas, she saw a slim black phone wedged between the driver's seat and the center console. It wasn't the one she was familiar with. Curiosity mixed with unease as she reached for it, her pulse quickening. The phone was unlocked, the screen lit up with a flood of unread messages. Some were from her, others from Emma. Her stomach tightened as she scrolled, each message confirming what she had feared but never wanted to believe. The same words, the same promises, sometimes only hours apart, sent to both sisters as if they were interchangeable parts of Daniel's life. By the time Daniel returned to the car, Lily had tucked the phone back into its place, her face composed. She didn't speak of what she found until later that evening when she called Emma. Her voice was tight and controlled, but it shook at the edges. She told Emma she had something to show her, something that couldn't be ignored. They met in Emma's apartment, and Lily placed the phone on the table between them, like a piece of damning evidence in a courtroom. Together they went through the messages, the photos, and the call logs. It was worse than either had imagined. He hadn't just been dividing his time, he had been recycling the same gestures, the same lies, the same expressions of love for both of them. Emma's face was pale as she read message after message, her hand trembling slightly. The betrayal hit her in two ways, first as a partner, and then as a sister. It wasn't only that Daniel had lied, but that those lies had driven a wedge between them, without their knowledge. Every missed family event, every moment of quiet distance over the past year, had been shaped by the man sitting comfortably in both of their lives. Lily's anger burned hotter, sharper. She replayed every memory in her mind, seeing it now through the lens of deception. Every compliment he gave her felt cheapened, every plan they'd made tainted. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst that night. Instead, there was a heavy, focused silence. The sisters sat together, side by side, both trying to process the reality of what had been done to them. The weight of their combined knowledge shifted something between them. Any lingering sense of rivalry dissolved, replaced by the cold, unshakable clarity that they had been manipulated by the same person. They could have confronted him right then. Emma could have called him over, demanded answers, and thrown the evidence in his face. Lily could have sent the screenshots to him with a single scathing message, but neither of them moved in that direction. The shock was giving way to something else, something more deliberate. They realized that Daniel's skill in lying had been built on the assumption that his victims acted alone. If they were united, they had a different kind of power. The conversation turned from disbelief to planning. They began gathering more proof, not just from the phone, but from their own lives. Emma dug through old texts, comparing them to Lily's. They discovered nearly identical messages sent to both on the same day, only a few hours apart. Lily found receipts in her apartment that matched dates Emma remembered spending with him. It was as if his entire web of lies had been laid bare, each thread connecting neatly to the other. In the following days, they became more observant than ever. They answered his messages normally, laughed at his jokes, and pretended to believe every word he said. He had no idea that the two women he thought were separate worlds were now in constant communication, sharing every detail of his behavior in real time. It was a strange, almost surreal game, watching him weave more lies, knowing each one would be documented and stored as ammunition. The more they uncovered, the more they realized this wasn't just about them. Hints of other names appeared in his messages, and receipts, fragments of a larger pattern that suggested they weren't his first victims. They didn't know how many women had been caught in his web, but they were certain of one thing: he had chosen the wrong pair to deceive this time. By the end of that week, the shock had hardened into resolve. The betrayal was no longer an open wound. It was fuel. They would not simply walk away. They would make sure Daniel paid for every lie, every false promise, and every fracture he had caused between them. They wouldn't just expose him, they would make it impossible for him to play this game again, and they would do it together. Over the next month, Emma and Lily crafted their plan with the kind of precision Daniel himself had once used to maintain his lies. They both understood that an impulsive confrontation would only give him a chance to twist the story, to manipulate their emotions, and to escape with part of his image intact. That wasn't enough. They wanted the truth laid out in a way that left no room for denial, no opportunity for him to rebuild the carefully polished facade he had used to deceive them. Their goal was not just to hurt him, it was to dismantle the version of himself he had worked so hard to sell to the world. The first step was to collect everything. They combed through months of text messages, compiling screenshots that showed identical words sent to each of them. They saved photos he had sent privately, ones meant to seem intimate and unique, only to discover he had duplicated them. Receipts from gifts, reservations at restaurants, and hotel bookings began to form a timeline that showed how he had juggled them with almost mechanical efficiency. They even noted the patterns of his lies, recognizing the phrases he used when covering his tracks. While gathering this evidence, they also began to study him more closely. Emma paid attention to the subtle shifts in his tone when he lied, the way his eyes flickered or his jaw tightened, ever so slightly. Lily focused on his habits. How he avoided certain questions, how he always seemed to keep one part of his life hidden, how he steered conversations away from anything that might link his two worlds. They learned his patterns in a way that made them feel as though they were finally seeing the real man beneath the performance. They also started tracing his past. Quietly, they reached out to mutual acquaintances, framing their questions casually so as not to draw suspicion. What they uncovered was unsettling. Daniel had done this before. There had been other women, some in overlapping relationships, others discarded abruptly when the truth got too close. None had worked together to expose him, which was likely why he'd been able to continue without consequence. Emma and Lily realized they were in a unique position, not just as his most recent victims, but as sisters who could act as a united front. Once the evidence was overwhelming, they shifted their focus to the moment of exposure. They wanted it to be undeniable, but also public enough to strip him of his ability to manipulate the narrative afterward. They discussed sending everything to his friends, his family, and his employer. They considered posting the proof online, ensuring it spread beyond his control. The more they talked, the more their plan became less about revenge for themselves and more about warning others about the man he truly was. Still, they needed the confrontation itself. They wanted to see the moment when Daniel's confidence cracked, when the realization hit that his perfectly balanced double life had collapsed in on itself. They agreed it would happen in person, in a setting where they could control the circumstances. Emma suggested her apartment, private enough for them to speak without interruption, but familiar to Daniel so he wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. For weeks, they maintained the facade. Emma accepted his flowers and laughed at his small jokes. Lily went on spontaneous outings with him and listened as he made more promises he had no intention of keeping. Neither showed even the faintest hint of suspicion. If anything, they made him feel more secure, encouraging him to believe he was as clever as he thought. Behind the scenes, however, every interaction was calculated. They documented his words, timed his visits, and built a sequence of events that would make their case airtight. The evidence grew until it was impossible to deny, even for a man like Daniel. Finally, they set the date. It would be a Friday evening, just after Daniel finished work. Emma invited him over for what he believed would be a quiet dinner. Lily would already be there, waiting. The sisters rehearsed the order in which they would present the evidence, each piece building on the last, leaving him with no room to explain, no time to recover. And when it was done, the rest of the world would know exactly who he was and what he had done. By the night before, everything was in place. The folders of proof were ready, the distribution list prepared, the timing aligned. All they needed was for Daniel to walk through the door, unaware that every step he took toward Emma's apartment was a step closer to the end of the life he had built. For the first time in months, the sisters felt united not by blood alone, but by purpose. The lies had brought them here, but the truth, sharp, heavy, and ready, would be what ended it. The rain was steady that Friday evening, tapping against the windows in a slow, rhythmic pattern, as Emma set the final preparations in place. The living room was spotless, the lights dimmed just enough to create a calm, almost intimate atmosphere. On the coffee table sat two neatly stacked folders, each containing the months of evidence she and Lily had gathered. Lily arrived early, her expression unreadable, her phone in hand and camera already set to record. There was no nervous laughter between them, no second guessing. The time for doubt had passed. When Daniel finally arrived, he looked exactly as he always did, confident, relaxed, carrying himself with the same self-assured smile that had fooled them for so long. He kissed Emma on the cheek, greeted Lily casually, and glanced around the room without a flicker of suspicion. He didn't notice the phone angled discreetly toward him, didn't see the folders as anything more than ordinary papers. He had no idea the evening would dismantle the image he had built for himself. Emma began by sliding one of the folders toward him. Inside were screenshots, hundreds of them, each one time-stamped, each one a piece of the puzzle he thought he had kept hidden. His smile faltered as his eyes moved from one page to the next. Messages he had sent to Lily on the same days he had told Emma he was working late. Photographs sent to both women, worded as though they were unique. Reservations for restaurants and hotels that directly contradicted his explanations. The more he turned the pages, the quieter he became. Then came the second folder, filled with receipts, photos, and notes detailing his movements. The timeline was meticulous, each date matched with proof of where he truly was. Emma and Lily watched him absorb it, the air in the room growing heavier with every passing second. He tried to speak at first with a laugh, then with a strained explanation, but his words were drowned out by Emma reading aloud one of his own messages, followed by Lily reading another, nearly identical one, sent just hours apart to a different phone. The realization seemed to settle over him in slow waves. His charm, his carefully constructed excuses, none of it mattered now. There was no space for him to twist the story, no room to maneuver out of the corner he was in. He had built his life on the belief that his victims would always be isolated, each too embarrassed or hurt to work together. But here, in this small apartment on a rainy night, two of them sat side by side, united and armed with the truth. When the confrontation ended, Daniel didn't storm out or shout. He simply sat back in his chair, his face drained of the easy warmth he had worn when he walked in. The silence that followed was almost louder than his voice could have been. Eventually he left, the door closing behind him with a dull final sound. But for Emma and Lily, it wasn't over. Within minutes, they began executing the second phase of their plan. The files, neatly organized and labeled, were sent to his friends, his family, and his co-workers. The evidence was uploaded to social media, posted in a way that left no question about its authenticity. The story spread quickly, each share ensuring that Daniel's reputation would not survive the night. The same charm that had once made him so likable now seemed sinister when paired with the proof of his deceit. By Monday morning the fallout was complete. His employer, citing concerns about trust and professionalism, ended his position. Friends distanced themselves, some publicly expressing their shock at what they had learned. His family, blindsided, retreated into silence. In the small community of Willow Creek, Daniel's name became a cautionary tale, whispered in coffee shops and mentioned with a shake of the head at neighborhood gatherings. For the sisters, the weeks that followed were strangely quiet. There was no sense of gloating, no dramatic celebration. Instead, there was a steady, grounding relief. They had taken something deeply personal, something meant to hurt and divide them, and turned it into a shared act of justice. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer carried the weight of secrecy. Daniel left town not long after, disappearing without a trace. Whether he started over somewhere else or attempted to rebuild the life he had lost, neither Emma nor Lily cared to know. In their minds, the chapter was closed. What mattered was that he could no longer hide behind the mask he had worn so easily, and that he would think twice before trying to play the same game again. In the end, they had not just exposed a liar, they had reclaimed their trust in each other. The rain that had fallen the night of his downfall had washed away more than just the illusion of love. It had left behind something far stronger, a bond that no one could break again.